This is not starting, or it has. Anyways, I'm glad that no one heard about the flying and farting.
But now they have, and now they're wondering, and they're like, "Oh wow, we missed the best part." And whatnot.
Yeah, well, you should join early. Anyways, I don't think I have a super strong agenda. I will say that I have been writing a lot lately, a lot more. I had the beginning of the year, I wrote a lot about APIs for Drupalize Me, but that's not. Oh well, there are a couple of those that are free and public. But yeah, these weeks I've been writing about the hard problems when decoupling, and that uncovered a bunch of issues that may deserve some longer conversation, and I'm going to propose those. But I want to go a little bit of Scrum first, so we can give everything a chance, because I know that you've been busy doing the typed data and what's the other one, the taxonomy parent thing, right?
Yep. Do you want me to give an update?
Yeah, that would be great.
Perhaps that can start with the complex data stuff, because that's really the most important area by far, and it affects the entire ecosystem, and that's the one doing most of the things there.
Yeah, so we are pushing that along. I'm not sure, probably since last time you were on the call, we may have switched it from using the exposed to using set internal, just as the pretty much acts the same way, but that was suggested. It's pretty far along. Tests are passing. I rewrote there's a separate issue for the cached part of it. So like if you have process text, eventually you're going to want to cache or there'll be cache tags probably in the text processing or other things. But we're not handling that in the first patch, just to make it simpler. So Wim reviewed it, had mostly nits. Amatesco reviewed it, and that's what I'm looking at right now, but his seems like he said it was mostly small stuff, though I haven't got through all of it yet. And yeah, so hopefully we're good. I rewrote so after the tests are passing on the main patch, I re-rolled the caching into a separate issue, and that's passing too. And then re-rolled the text processed, or the processed text one, which is not passing, but only has a few things broken. I haven't had a chance to look and see what that, why those weren't passing, but presumably we're pretty close to showing that it actually works for something besides just test items. And I think that's it. Yep.
So the issue that Ted has just been describing is an infrastructure issue, right? So the problem is that there are several field types whose normalizations are incomplete, like data is actually missing. One example that JSON API is, for example, working around is the lack of a file download URL for file entities. So you can get the public : / something URL, but you can't get the actual HTTP URL by which you can actually retrieve said file. And so JSON API includes its own workaround, and I just heard last week from the Acquia Lightning team that actually conflicted with a workaround they had somewhere else or something. Like, the thing is, we need to fix this in core, obviously, so the JSON API doesn't need to work around it anymore, so that core REST actually also supports it, and so on. And so the infrastructure that Ted has been working on will make it so that it's A, consistent, B, simple, and C, it works everywhere. JSON API, core REST, GraphQL, and automatic documentation. And so there's several issues blocked on it. The other areas that have been moving forward, this is probably the most important area.
Actually, I forgot to mention something about that, Wim.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think before DrupalCon, I was thinking it wouldn't work because it had this sort of cascading effect into a bunch of other stuff. But we figured out how to limit that to only fields, I think, and basically because computed fields, like different from computed properties, are already exposed by default. We have now a set internal on fields, but you have to explicitly set them as internal or they won't be. So if you wanted a particular field, not just properties of a field, to not be exposed in the normalization, you can set that, and then it'll just be skipped over in the content entity normalizers.
Yep. And so that is actually perhaps an interesting way for JSON API extras to function, because in theory, what you could do is set internal on any field, and then it will work both in JSON API, but also in core REST and also in GraphQL. So then things can be kept in sync without JSON API having to have its own configuration infrastructure to be able to achieve this. Which
I was actually going to comment on that, because I talked to Michael Tusnichel in New York about a way to do this in a joint effort with GraphQL and JSON API, and I'm glad that that did not progress, because this got solved in core, which is best.
Well, it's not in yet, right? But yes.
Well, but it will be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is not something Ted and I came up with, or just Ted and I came up with. We got together at DrupalConf Vienna with a typed data maintainer, Fago, entity API maintainer, HCHONOV, still not sure how to pronounce his name, Chonov, and field API maintainer, Andrei Matiscu. And so based on their feedback, this is where we ended up. And so we have the consensus from the people who decide how these things work, and that's how we ended up at this place. So kudos to them for helping us get to this point, which is super tricky. And yes, this brings the entire ecosystem along, instead of REST API doing one workaround and JSON API another, and so on, and GraphQL yet another. So that's wonderful. So that is by far the most important update, I think, and it's something that affects everything. There's a few other important things.
Before you move on, sorry, this is going to be super quick. This will not be paired with a REST issue to adapt the entity normalizations to use that. That will be in a follow-up, right?
No, that's in this issue.
Oh, that's coming in this issue. So, okay. Yes. So when that lands, probably we want to have one follow-up in JSON API to respect that. And I don't know how that will, conflict with features that JSON API extras brings or not. Okay, cool.
I think I already filed an issue for that, but maybe it was for another one. But I think I already filed an issue against JSON API for exactly
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
So that is by far the most important area. What else happened that is fairly important is several views plus core REST issues that landed, one of which was blocking the term parent stuff, which also affects JSON API. So one thing that was about conflicting, like if you serve a REST export display at a certain URL, that could conflict with the default HTML view if it was using the same path. So it could override it in a way that you would never be able to access the HTML anymore. You would only be able to access the JSON, which was silly. Then another thing is about views handling of multi-value base fields, which blocked the term parent issue, which then, once it's in, will also help JSON API and GraphQL. Another one that is RTBC currently is for the normalizations of config entities. It has this underscore core key in the data it contains, at least for shipped configuration. And JSON API already has a workaround for that, if I remember correctly. But we are fixing it in Drupal core, and then JSON API can inherit the same or similar solution from it. So because the underscore core stuff is completely irrelevant to any client, and in fact, it should not be able to be modified as well. So that is also quite close. And then there's more test coverage that is landing currently, and some progress on the file upload front as well. But that is still blocked on the normalization of files, which means the download URL, which JSON API has a workaround for, but that then is in turn blocked on the complex data stuff that Ted has been working on. So it's like all the things are coming together, and we're getting to a point where all of those things are being fixed instead of it being fixed at some distant point in the future. So some pretty good progress.
Cool. Well, yeah, that's fantastic. Also, I didn't point out earlier, but this was also a souvenir. Oh, this is hard, from Japan. Anyways, that thing over there, the lantern. For the rest of the stuff, I think that we are good in most of the fronts. Nothing major came up during these weeks for JSON API. Something major came up in simple auth, and that is that we got a stable release, and since then we didn't get any issues. So that's pretty cool to also see that one reaching a stable release. Got some extra work on sub requests and got more, even more tests in. I feel good about it. However, the number of sites that are using it, the usage is a little bit low for me to say, hey, we're not getting bug requests or bug reports, and consider it to move up the ladder towards stability. So I'm going to give that one a little bit more time, unless anyone else has other thoughts.
The sub requests module, you mean?
Yes, yeah, sorry. I don't know what I said.
No, I was just like, you switched pretty quickly from simple auth to.
Oh, sorry, yes.
That's fine, it's fine, just clarifying. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion about that. It seems like it's advanced enough that it probably merits from living in beta or RC phase for a longer time, because I think only pretty advanced developers, if you will, are going to use it. So it's probably harder to get lots of feedback for that module.
Yeah, I agree. So if you're listening to this and you want to be an advanced developer at the eyes of Win Lears, just give it a try.
Well, hopefully you don't hopefully your use case is simple enough that you don't need it, but
no, right. I recently published an article on how to use it, and I hope that triggers some curiosity on it, because I've seen like dramatic performance improvement, especially when creating. So the example on the article is creating 2 tags from a decoupled site in an article, like, just like we have a form in Drupal that creates a bunch of entities at once. I wanted to do an article with 2 tags and an image, but we cannot upload images yet, because it can combine binary upload with text upload and whatever. So it can do any combination of HTTP.
I have one small tip or suggestion there. I saw your article and it's great. I think it helps people get started and get an idea of how to use it and so on. Perhaps you can also link it from the project page, so that well, because you have a long, beautiful, well-written article, so just link to it.
Yeah, I will do that. The publishing of the article happened during vacation.
I know.
So, but yeah, and
all.
also sometimes it just crosses the line of, shameful self promotion.
Well, it's documentation explaining how to use it. I don't think that's
okay. Cool.
And sponsoring it, so I don't see that as being problematic at all.
Okay. And anyways, I'm cool with shameful. And finally, I am currently writing those articles about decoupled heart problems, which I think it will offer some insights on the things that you're going to face eventually when you're nearing the 80% of your decoupled project, and also some other interesting challenges that we've had for architecting the whole decoupled Drupal system, and that is coalescing around schemas in the end. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. If anyone else has something, I'm going to give them an outlet because I see that Yingxiang and Carlos joined. Do you guys have any updates? Something you want to share?
I actually have a quick question about the sub request module. I was wondering if the supporting transaction on the sub request module is something that you would consider, or is that even possible?
It is possible. However, offering the ability of a developer to express how a transaction should work is incredibly complicated. Not the execution in the server, but offering all the options. Like
I see.
something that I like is that you can do things like get this thing, and if it does a 404, I don't care because the next sub request is not going to be able to take the dependency for it, right? And I don't want to fail everything just because. So since transactions are very much implementation dependent, you cannot get same default, let's say, and
I see.
offering the configurability is like it's super hard.
Is it perhaps like a 80% use case that would be valuable to support, and then only if you have more complex need, then you would need to write custom code? Just posing the question.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
I think that yes, just failing the request that failed is the 80% case. But right now there is no extensibility to consider a whole transaction and roll back things that you already executed, which is what a transaction would do.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that's something that some other people asked already. So I'm gonna put that down somewhere as well to make sure that that's communicated.
Okay.
All right. So schemas. How can I frame this discussion when I don't have my my thoughts in order? I think that the great thing about GraphQL is that they didn't invent anything, but they used all these existing concepts and put them together in an opinionated way, right? That opinionated way sometimes may work in your favor, sometimes not, but that's what happens with an opinionated way. In the REST land, you just have all the tools and you put everything together yourself. And sometimes by doing that, we don't follow the best practices because there are so many pieces of the puzzle. I think how we're treating schemas is one of those, because from the Drupal side, we can only generate the schemas of the type data or the data that we are storing in Drupal. And because we don't know what happens after that, we only know what the database schemas are holding and some other stuff that's in type data. So those schemas, either you use them or then you don't have any schema to use, because right now we are not tracking any manipulations that happen at the normalizer level to say, hey, the thing that you had stored as an integer has now become a string, which is of format date, right? And since our normalizers don't convey these changes in schemas, we cannot track this in the output, saying, okay, imagine that I was able to know from a static point what normalizers this particular data is going to go through, which we can't. But even if we could, you wouldn't know, oh, this transformed in here in this normalizer, and it's no longer an integer, but it's a string. And now your schemas are not true. Besides, you could have dynamic normalizers, things like on Wednesday, I want my dates to be unit dates, but any other day of the week, I want them to be ISO strings, right? You can do that in a normalizer nowadays, and there is nothing preventing this from happening, which is super flexible. But at the same time, it makes schemas almost impossible to make sure, or to ensure that they are true. The best you can do is offer a schema and hope that all the normalizers that it passes through are controlled enough that they don't change types without informing the schema. So I was thinking that GraphQL's code base, vast majority of it is generating their schemas, because.
And are you talking about the Drupal module, GraphQL Drupal module?
Yes, the GraphQL Drupal module has a lot of code making sure that they generate the schemas, because one of the good things, and I've done this in other projects and it's worked out great for us, is that if you derive your API from the schema instead of, make the API, make the schema, and ensure that they are kind of the same, is that the schemas are true. Otherwise, your stuff doesn't work, and you really notice it. And I was thinking, would it be possible for a future iteration of things to have schema generation be I don't want this expression, but I think everyone understands it, a first-class citizen in our stack, so we can from there derive the APIs. And I think that the work that Ted was mentioning before is kind of hinting us in that direction, but it's kind of a small piece over there that's relevant enough for it to exist.
It's explicitly stated actually as part of that issue that if we do not do that issue, so the issue about making sure that in type data we indicate certain fields and properties to be internal or not internal, that is something that otherwise would be impossible to reflect automatically in documentation, therefore in schemas and so on. So that is actually one of the reasons we blocked all the other issues on that issue, on that infrastructure issue, because otherwise we would be making the problem bigger and worse for the long term. So it's a small part of what you want to achieve, indeed. So it's a necessary piece of the puzzle, but it's not an answer to everything that you described, obviously. And yeah, you're right. The current ability to dynamically alter and override normalizers and so on, the consequence is that things are too unpredictable in terms of generating a schema. So that is a problem. It's hard in the existing infrastructure to layer it on top without breaking BC and so on. But
yeah,
we'll see.
Totally. I was thinking about what it would look like. Not that I'm gonna start that enterprise, but what it would look like to go from a JSON API with pure normalizers to JSON API with stricter normalizers. Things like what we have in JSON API extras that are called field enhancers, use that concept, which the eligibility for that normalizer to be used has to be from a static point of view, cannot be just determined at runtime. Yep. And also it has to convey not only normalization and denormalization, but the schema going out, the changes on the schema going out, and the changes on the schema going in. So something like that would ensure that if other people want to integrate with JSON API, they need to tell us, hey, you're changing the schema. What is the new schema?
It's very similar to how configuration in Drupal 8 works, where if you want to be able to translate it, then it's required that you have config schemas for it. So similarly, you need a schema in order to have it work the way you want. But there too, it was kind of an afterthought. So it is not compulsory, not required in all cases, only if you want to have translatable configuration. So yeah, it's going to be similar here. Over time, I think we can perhaps evolve it to become required. But it's going to be an interesting exercise of balancing backwards compatibility with moving the ecosystem forward. But it doesn't seem impossible, to be honest. But it's going to be a long process if we don't want to break existing sites.
So to me, that would be the only way to that we can avoid, re-architecting the whole thing to go from schemas up.
Yep.
But we have some baseline schemas, and these are all the changes, iterative changes that are happening to it. So we can compute the end schema by knowing this is what's going to happen, and this is always what is going to happen, and it's not going to change on Thursdays. Oh.
Yeah, and that example of it might be different on Wednesday or Thursday. That's exactly why we added the concept of cache context, so that it's required that you express any variations that you have in your logic. So if there is any branching, any if-else statement that determines we choose this normalization or this other normalization, that is when we require in the general rendering of Drupal. So when dealing with render arrays, if you have such an if-else branch, or when dealing with access results, if you have an if-else branch, then you have to express that with a cache context to indicate that, well, based on this thing, in this example, it is Wednesday or it is not Wednesday, or given every day of the week might have a different normalization. Well, that is the cache context that would express that then, so that at least the upstream system knows, well, okay, it varies based on phase of the moon, day of the week, temperature, whatever it may be, but you have to express that. It does make things more complex though. So I think ideally for something like normalizers, it doesn't seem very realistic or sensible to support that. So ideally, you would not allow cache context, and you would not allow if-else statements. So different normalizations depending on some condition. I think. I haven't seen a good use case for it yet, but maybe you have.
Yeah, I mean, the serialization API is too low level to impose these restrictions, I think. Like
the existing normalization API is what you mean, right? Yeah, I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So coming up with something else. Yeah.
Ted, do you have any thoughts about all this?
I was sort of thinking, like, if we got something like schemata in core, it would make sense at that point to be able to add to our REST tests, like actually testing. I mean, this is not exactly what you guys are talking about, but potentially we could add the test to actually say, okay, verify that all of our REST tests, comply with the schema that we say is going to be generated. So you sort of have that sort of loop back around.
The cool thing is that JSON API already does this.
Oh, cool.
Well, to the extent that JSON API tests verify that all JSON API responses comply with the official JSON API schema, which is only like the high-level schema. You're talking about field-level normalization schema as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So potentially that would show a way for individual sites or modules to say, okay, I'm going to add normalizers. So I now want to add tests to make sure that I didn't mess up, the schema. So maybe it would be easier for individual sites if they're not going to do the if statements in the normalizers, if they can just say, yeah, this will always be it. But they want to add normalizers, then they could sort of verify, yeah, the schemata or the schema that's coming out, all my tests that I've written will pass that. And then we could think about ways to say, okay, how do we allow? I think in schemata right now there's just like a general alter at the end, but I could be wrong. But how do we allow them to alter it to say, yeah, I'm overriding a normalizer and I know it's going to change the schema of this particular property or something.
Schemata works with normalizers, so you can override a particular normalizer on the type data with the basic priority system for normalization. I would like that. I mean, having that in core would trigger me to have, JSON API built on top of the schemas instead of in parallel. But
Wait, so I haven't actually looked at a lot of the internals of schemata. You're saying right now schemata actually looks at which normalizers would be selected?
no. What I say is that it uses the normalization system to normalize the type data.
Yeah.
The types, not the actual instances of content, and then it transforms that into a JSON schema document, which is what we want. Yeah, there are two things. I think that we were talking before about assuring that the schemas are correct, and Ted was suggesting having a way to verify, do active verification that your API is still complying to the schemas. I think that both are important, and to be honest, the verification thing, I think it's easier to achieve because that could go into a JSON API without backwards compatibility issues. Just right now, we're checking the general output is JSON API-ish, but we could, if the schemata module is also installed, we could say, okay, schemata, give me the schema for the articles resource, and now start checking that everything that comes out of JSON API complies to that schema. So if, let's say, meta tags injects a normalizer there that breaks the expectation, then you start getting errors, and you can look into it and maybe dismiss the error or work on that. So that could be something. I don't know. Do you think that that's interesting?
Yeah, definitely interesting. But currently the verification or the validation of JSON API responses is only happening in tests, as far as I know, not in production. So for actual.
Actually, it is happening in development mode because it's what's it called? It's an assert and
okay, gotcha. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Asserts run whenever asserts are enabled on your PHP environment, which is also usually on dev environments. Okay, well, even better. Happy to be wrong. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was going to suggest. I misremember then. Cool.
Mm-hmm. I actually think that you suggested it.
Okay. It's been a while since I looked at that code. I think that all sounds cool if we can get to that point, but it's of course going to be quite a path to get to that point.
I think it's going to be easy.
Okay. I'm happy you're optimistic. Actually, talking about optimism, and I need to drop on a few, is JSON API. Gabe Sulis has been working quite a bit on the query builder, refactoring it. That's also some really good and important work, I think, for long-term stability of JSON APIs. Just wanted to give a call out to Gabe there.
Woohoo, Gabe. Yeah. There is one thing with nested includes that need to be solved. And then I'm tempted to just merge it in dev and see what happens. It's quite a piece of code, but I gave it already, I think, 3 passes, and nothing super important came up, and I didn't want to flood with nits, so.
Yep. Yeah. No, I've been reviewing it as well. Looks like a big step forward. Yeah.
Cool. We are over time, and it was an awesome call, I think. I need to update 2 things about documentation and then create an issue for JSON API as a result. And yeah, it's Monday. Yay.
All right.
Good luck with starting the work week.
All right.
The work week, yeah. Don't look at the. If you just woke up, don't look at the WPA stuff. Just in case.
WPA. Oh, you mean the Wi-Fi? So, yeah. I know the guy who did that research. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's from Belgium. He's from the same university as I was at. He's a year younger, I think. So yeah, he's been doing that sort of research that is frightening everybody in the entire world for years now. Like, oh, apparently web is insecure. Apparently WPA2 enterprise is insecure, and so on. So yeah, if you maintain lots of servers or networks, yeah, then you need to be afraid. But I think none of us on this call do. So
Yeah, or you're paranoid.
yes.
Which that's very personal. Carlos, you were going to say something?
No, I'm good. I wanted to talk to you after the meeting, if it's possible.
Sorry, I heard a lot of static.
If it's possible to talk to you after the meeting, you know.
Yes, yeah, I have a brief moment
Okay.
after it.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Matteo. Thanks, everyone. See you next.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Wim. Thank
Bye.
you, Ted. Thank you, everyone.
All right, let me stop.